most meditation teachers are missing in sort of trauma awareness? Like if you had 10 minutes with every meditation teacher in the world and we're like, right, now David's up 10 minutes. What are the things you'd really want them to get?
Well, just talking to you about this is actually it. It's just an awareness of the issue, because I think there's a way that, I mean, I was trained this way. It's like, we've been doing this for 2,600 years. Someone's working about it. Why would it be any different in terms of modifications? We're just being oversensitive to people right now. And then the more that I've talked to, say, Buddhist teachers, the more that they remind me, actually, different modifications have always been baked into Buddhist and contemplative practice. So say you're feeling tired and dissociated, you can open your eyes, you can take a walk. So trauma-sensitive practice is not necessarily new, but there is a lot more understanding about the nuances of the physiology of trauma that we can keep bringing in. So for example, Mark, you just said, you paying attention, you being in contact with someone else on that retreat was profoundly helpful in terms of your regulation. So just knowing that there's these different, we can talk about the ways that interpersonal regulation supports what's known as the window of tolerance regulation. There's all these different levers that we can pull, but it's not to get away from the core teaching around mindfulness, which is that we can actually learn to be with greater fluctuations of our experience. So I guess for the 10 minutes that you're giving me with every meditation teacher in the world, that'd be great, by the way, if you could arrange that.
No, but with the conference, I mean, it's not far off.
I mean, I would say just be aware. Well, here's actually, we haven't talked about this. Here's the 30-second thing I want people to know. People that are struggling with trauma will tend to reflexively orient to traumatic stimuli, period. What that means is, say you and I were both meditating, we both had some kind of history of trauma. The odds are we will naturally pay attention to anything that's threatening to us. Now that's both outside of our experience, but also internally. So if my lungs get tight and that was connected to a past trauma, I will naturally pay attention there. So what does this mean? Well, just think of the setup for a moment when you're asking someone who's traumatized to meditate. In all likelihood, what will be predominant is sensations that are connected to trauma. There could also be flashbacks, intrusive thoughts. That is where their attention will go. Again, that's not a bad thing. It's actually a deeply intelligent response to orient. But if that person does not have tools and they're not as empowered as maybe you were, Mark, they didn't ask for the hug, they didn't ask for taking a break, they can get really stuck. So that's it. If there's an awareness of that setup and that dynamic that can actually provoke more dysregulation, you're way ahead of the game. And then from there, we can talk about, the year of training that you can do to have all these different tools and modifications. But that's 50% of it right there, is just knowing you're not a hammer and everything's not a nail when it comes to mindfulness.
Yeah, I mean, just being aware of dysregulation, being aware of numbing, being aware of hyperarousal, sort of basic concepts of you could probably get across an hour or two would be a huge upgrade. I think is the phrase John Kabat-Zinn generously says on your website, an essential upgrade. But that is an upgrade to know about that stuff for a meditation teacher, even a very well-trained one.
Yeah, I don't think of it as that people have to fundamentally change what they're practicing, or that if you start taking on trauma-informed practice, that means you're going to have to, do away with everything you know. I do think of it as an upgrade. And here's in my experience, Mark, it's that people who, you probably found this too, I feel like people who have an understanding of the biological, psychological, and social components of trauma, I feel like they're often better leaders and teachers. Mm-hmm. Whether that's a dance teacher, whether that's someone who's leading meditation or yoga, it just adds this layer of complexity. It doesn't mean then that you have to be afraid of what you're teaching, etc. But just knowing that trauma is likely going to be in the rooms that you're in, I think it's a big support for any of us that are teaching.
I'm leading an organization right now. I'm managing a team of about 50 people. And, 5 of them have some fairly serious trauma. And the other 45 have some,
Sure, yeah.
And the ones, particularly the ones that have a serious amount, it's really useful to go, okay, this person feels unsafe right now. This person's overwhelmed right now. This person is focusing on the negative. This person is thinking, as a leader and as a manager, realizing that one of my coaches basically said, look, your job is to be 10% calmer than the people you lead so that they don't freak out.
Wow.
And I was like, okay, that's my only job. She was like, pretty much.
10%. That's not bad.
I was like, I can do 10%, you know? So it was, as a leader, it's definitely a lens that I increasingly use. So and this stuff's not just for meditation teachers.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a lens. I started when I, 15 years ago, I'll tell you the first trauma session when I was doing my own trauma work, first person I ever worked with, first session, I walk in, I'm all ready. And she said, I want you to tell me what's working in your life. And I said, well, I don't want to talk about what's working.
What? I don't even think about that.
Yeah. I was like, let me tell you about where I'm feeling really messed up. And she said, yeah, I know. I get it. She said, your capacity to be with what's working is going to be linked to your capacity to actually integrate what's hard. And that was a game changer for me. Instead of just going right at trauma and what's difficult, it was actually creating almost like a bigger field, or it was almost like a horse that created this bigger pasture for it to run in. And so I started to see the world a lot through that lens of trauma, maybe similar to what you're saying, where you're like, okay, let me pull back from the system and look at what's happening in the system and how can I support the system. The 10% is a great example. And that's how I'm often training meditation teachers. Great. What would they need in a given moment with a person or a group that would actually help resource the system and allow someone to be regulated, or at least make choices inside their practice? So I really resonate with that. Once you start to work with trauma, you start to see it everywhere. And here we are with COVID. I mean, there's a level of adversity.
Do you think people are, right now, I just like at any time, the core of my team are freaking out or in dysregulation. I don't think that would have been the case a year ago.
Sure. Yeah.
It seems like people are closer to that edge now.
Yeah. Yeah. Have you talked about the window of tolerance on any podcasts? Has that come up at all?
Bring it up again.
So Dan Siegel, neuroscientist that many will know from UCLA, talks about this window of tolerance, which has been used in a bunch of different fields, but a couple people used it inside of trauma. Pat Ogden was one. But it is really helpful, Mark, for that question around COVID in this moment. So window of tolerance basically says there's an optimal zone of physiological arousal that someone or a system really can be in. And when you're in that window, you're more likely to feel in a sense of choice, agency, you're connected to yourself, and you can tolerate the fluctuations of stress that you're going to experience. And then on either side of that, we have what's known as hyper or hypo arousal, too much, too little. So when we've been talking this conversation about dysregulation, that's when you're out of the window. When you're, if you're hypervigilant, really stressed out, you might be up in red. I imagine that with the conference coming, there's probably a lot of fluctuations between these two. Hypo arousal is when you're more like spaced out, checked out. Neither of these are bad. We need them. They're self-protection. It's fight, flight, freeze. But here's the most important thing. Stress, trauma, and adversity will shrink our window of tolerance.
Right.
Right? Not just as individuals, but groups at the same time.
So right now, it's taking less to freak people out.
Exactly.
It used to be like some big thing, and unless there was something major, you were pretty calm. You weren't spaced out. You weren't super fight or flight. You're just like, okay, we can handle this. Now it's like a little thing, and people are screaming about spilt milk. They're going crazy about the toilet roll in the supermarket. It is the narrowing of that window of what they're able to handle. And that's Absolutely. A very interesting situation to lead in, to be leading a major venture in, because it's like, okay, how do I help people stay in? Because it's some small thing will happen. I said, guys, the website went down for 10 minutes. It's okay. It's cool.
Right.
It's not the end of the world. We don't need to make this into the biggest thing ever. And it's very easy for things to become the biggest thing ever. To become overwhelming, to become crazy when that window of tolerance is shrunk just from COVID and life and people being under-resourced generally. Someone interviewed me yesterday for the conference, and they've been on lockdown for months. They were in Australia, in Melbourne.
Yeah.
You could just see she was ready to go,
Yeah.
I was like, I'm not going to upset this person. I didn't want to say anything because I could see it wouldn't take much to tip this woman.
And once you're out of your window, life is different. For a person, for a community, it is really hard. And you're right, it's a really hard time to lead. I often think of dysregulated arousal, like when you're cycling on either side of the window, it creates a lot of polarization. I think of leaders right now who are trying to kind of find some middle ground. And the system is just oscillating back and forth between too much and too little. It's such an intense time to lead. So then, Mark, I'll ask you, it's like, here you are in the position you're in, and your window is going to be key to actually keep the ship running. So what's helping you these days to keep your window somewhat cracked open? Do you have a book in there that you're just trying to keep the window, or what's happening?
Yeah, definitely. I'm doing 3 hours a day for my own resilience.
Oh, good.
Walking in by the sea helps me a lot. Swimming the sea, walking by the sea, walking barefoot on the grass, meditating every morning, exercising every day, at least an hour of coaching and therapy a day. So I'm getting to vent to someone else, and then just the basic physical stuff, eating well, getting a good night's sleep. There's a whole program of sort of basic stuff and more advanced stuff, but just about on the right side of it. A few people have said to me, given that you're 5 days away from this huge conference, you look okay. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not quite, tell me what you think. I'm not quite I'm more stressed than normal, but
of course,
but I'm not freaking out.
That's great.
And that's mostly, I think, because of the self-regulatory practices and some very good people I have around me. I want to give credit there.
Absolutely.
I'm lucky in that way. I'm resourced, right? I can afford the coach. I have this training in my background. There's people who don't.
Yes, absolutely. So this is where it's at when it comes to embodiment and trauma. It's that you have, Mark, you have tools that you've been developing over decades now. And for meditation teachers I'm working with, it's giving them the tools that can empower others. So the best news I hear is when a meditation student goes, I was really stressed out and I used this tool, whether it was the breath, I went for a walk, you have yours that you found. Everyone's going to be different. Quick story. Do you know Sharon Salzberg? The meditation
she did
teacher?
the conference. I interviewed her.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
So Sharon told me a story recently where she said she was doing work around survivors of gun violence and mass shootings. And basically tools was the key word of the meditations that she was leading. It's all about empowering people with tools. And she told a story where someone had gone back to their community and the school had run a test of, what would they do, like basically a fire drill for if there was an active shooter, and the person had a panic attack. I know it's crazy.
The fact that you guys do that as normal, I just want to take the stand for saying, what the fuck, right? That's the thing that has to happen in the States.
Yeah.
Like it needs someone from another country to say, guys, this is not a normal thing. That episode of South Park where there's so many school shooters that it becomes normalized.
Yeah. Well, I'm from Canada, and so when I came down here at first, there was, what I could tell is there's a fatigue that's come with it. I'm with you, and after, which is actually related to trauma. When there's situation after situation where there isn't actually some kind of different outcome or change, there's a feeling of freezing, hopelessness, and isolation that happens for a number of people, almost like it's deep a level of immobility and frustration around it. So anyway, I'm with you. But Sharon told a story about how the person had tools and goes, I have tools in this moment that I can use. That's what this is about. It's not like, here you are, Mark, with this conference. 1,000 teachers, very articulate and impressive people who you could fool yourself into thinking, oh well, I just need to be around this teacher every day for a year. They're my resilience, they're my resource. But actually the best teachers are the ones who are pointing to those tools, to those resources and resilience, and say, actually it's in you. Yeah, you can use this. I'm here to remind you of that, as opposed to becoming dependent on teachers. So that's what this work is about for me, giving people a lot of tools.
You remember Richard one time said, I'd been on some workshop, Richard Strezzi Heckler, a mutual teacher colleague. And I said, I went to this workshop. It was great. He said, oh, great. Well, what can you do differently now? I was just like, but it was really interesting. And he was like, yeah, cool. But what did you learn? Show me something. What's the tool you acquired? And I was like, actually, I just kind of had a nice time. I didn't really learn anything.
Yes, right.
It's a great question.
Which feels like a question that I try to be in when I'm leading anything is, are people coming away impressed with me or impressed with themselves? Were they kind of wowed, like, wow, he was really, whatever, sensitive, articulate, or did they say, wow, I really learned that. Now I can take this in. And I'm trying to always shift it up to not be to not take the focus off of me and really put it on the work. So that's a great question. I love that he asked that.
That's a nice question actually as well. What's in the middle? Is it me? Is it the work?
Aha, exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
What are we centering? And what would they say about this workshop or whatever it was when they came away from it? That's a great point.
I was finding if I do a pretty good job, people say, "Oh, Mark was a great teacher." If I do a really good job, they say, "Oh, that was kind of obvious." Yeah, and I'm glad I was reminded of that. You know,
Isn't this the piece about the leaders? Like the best leaders they're sort of invisible in the moments of pressure.
Yeah. Everyone's just like, "Wow, we're doing a great job as a team. This is, everything's
Yes,
going pretty well."
the we, exactly. The we. That's amazing.